Hollywood has given us plenty of loud, camera-ready romances. Jodie Foster and Alexandra Hedison have never been that kind of couple. For more than a decade, they've built a marriage almost entirely out of the public eye, choosing quiet dinners and closed sets over red carpets and headlines. Today, we're looking at how these two came together, the careers that shaped them long before they met, and what is actually known, as opposed to rumored, about their lives now. Jodie Foster and Alexandra Hedison have been together since around 2013, the same year Foster stepped up to accept the Cecil B. DeMille Award at the Golden Globes and delivered one of the most talked-about speeches in the show's history. By the time the two eventually married, they had already spent roughly a year together, and both brought a similar instinct for privacy into the relationship. Foster had spent almost her entire life in front of cameras. Hedison, a working actress turned photographer, understood exactly what that kind of scrutiny costs a person. That shared understanding, more than any single grand gesture, appears to be the foundation the relationship was built on. The couple married in a private ceremony in April 2014, a wedding so low-key that even the confirmation of it came only through a brief statement from Foster's representative to the press, rather than any public announcement from the couple themselves. That pattern, marking major life events quietly and letting only small details reach the outside world, has defined how they've operated ever since. They aren't recluses. Foster and Hedison do appear together at industry events, particularly ones tied to Foster's film and television work, and they've been photographed at award ceremonies including the Golden Globes and the Emmys over the years. But these appearances are the exception, not the rule, and neither has built any public persona around the relationship itself. To understand Foster's guardedness about her personal life, it helps to look at how early and how intensely her career started. Foster was born Alicia Christian Foster on November 19, 1962, in Los Angeles, and was working as a child model by the age of 3, appearing in television commercials before most kids start school. Sight index equals 14-1. She gained early recognition as a teen idol through Disney films including Napoleon and Samantha and Freaky Friday/Sight, but the role that changed the course of her career came in 1976. Cast by Martin Scorsese in Taxi Driver, Foster played Iris, a 12-year-old caught up in a world far beyond her years, a role so demanding for a child actor that, according to Foster's own account in later interviews, she had to undergo a psychological evaluation before she was allowed to take the part. The performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress at just 14 years old. Rather than fading after a striking child performance, as so many young actors do, Foster kept building. She stepped away from acting for several years to attend Yale University, graduating in 1985, then returned to Hollywood, and moved decisively into adult, dramatically demanding roles. In 1988, she won her first Academy Award for Best Actress playing Sarah Tobias, a sexual assault survivor, fighting for justice in the courtroom drama The Accused. 3 years later, she won a second Best Actress Oscar for The Silence of the Lambs, playing FBI trainee Clarice Starling, a role Foster has said she pursued personally because sight index equals 14-1. The character offered a real female heroine/sight at a time when that kind of leading role for a woman was rare. Foster didn't stop at acting. She moved into directing in the early 1990s, starting with Little Man Tate, and later directed Home for the Holidays and The Beaver, while continuing to build an acting resume that includes Contact, Panic Room, The Mauritanian, and Naiad. In 2024, she took on her first major television lead in HBO's True Detective, Night Country, a role that earned her both an Emmy Award and a Golden Globe. Across a career spanning more than 6 decades, Foster has remained one of the very few former child stars to transition seamlessly into an acclaimed adult career as both actress and director, all while keeping her private life almost entirely separate from her public one. That instinct toward privacy isn't incidental. In a recent interview reflecting on her early years in the industry, Foster suggested that gaining professional standing at a young age may have actually protected her from some of the exploitation that other young actors faced, saying that by the time she had her first Oscar nomination, she had accumulated enough standing in the business that people found her, in her words, too risky to try to take advantage of. She's also pointed to her own personality, describing herself as someone who doesn't wear her emotions on the surface, as part of what made her harder to manipulate. It's a rare moment of Foster connecting her guardedness directly to her early experience of fame, and helps explain why, even as one of the most recognizable actresses of her generation, she has kept so much of her personal story out of public view. Foster has also credited her mother, Evelyn "Brandy" Foster, who managed her early career, with trying to preserve some sense of an ordinary childhood alongside the film sets, insisting on regular schooling and normal friendships even while her daughter was one of the most in-demand child actors in the country. That balance between a demanding public career and a deliberately shielded personal life is a pattern Foster would later try to recreate for her own children. Beyond the awards and acclaim, Foster has also built a reputation in Hollywood for extreme selectivity. Rather than taking on a high volume of projects, she has spaced her work out over decades, choosing roles in dramas, thrillers, and character studies rather than chasing box office franchises. That selectivity is part of why, 6 decades into her career, she's still able to headline a prestige TV drama like True Detective, Night Country, and pick up new awards for it, rather than being defined solely by the roles she played in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. For years, tabloids speculated about Foster's personal life without her ever directly addressing it. That changed in part on January 13, 2013, when Foster accepted the Cecil B. DeMille Award at the 70th Golden Globe Awards. Rather than a direct announcement, she delivered a speech that referenced her life without over-explaining it, telling the audience she'd already done her coming out long before, in a much quieter way, among trusted friends and family. Later in that same speech, Foster thanked her former partner, film and TV producer Sidney Bernard, describing her warmly as a co-parent and someone who had been part of her life for 2 decades. She spoke about their sons, Charles, Charlie, and Christopher, Kit, calling them her reason to keep growing. The speech was widely covered at the time, with some viewers and commentators calling it a meaningful, if understated, acknowledgement of her identity, and others wishing she'd been more direct. Foster has since said in later interviews that she knew at the time the speech would be interpreted in different ways by different people, and that she wasn't trying to make a definitive statement so much as speak honestly on her own terms. Foster and Bernard had been a couple since the early 1990s and share 2 sons, Charles, born in 1998, and Christopher, born in 2001. The couple's relationship, which had never been widely publicized while it was ongoing, had ended some years before Foster's 2013 speech. Both sons have largely stayed out of the public eye since childhood, a choice that appears to reflect Foster's broader approach to keeping her family's daily life private, regardless of her own public profile. The speech itself covered far more ground than just her personal life. Foster also used the moment to thank longtime colleagues and collaborators she'd worked with for decades, reflected on the strange arc of a career that had started when she was 3 years old, and spoke emotionally about her mother, who by that point was living with dementia. Advocacy organizations at the time, including GLAAD, described the moment as significant given Foster's stature in the industry, while some commentators felt she'd stopped short of a fully direct statement. That mixed reception is part of why the speech is still discussed today. It managed to be personal and guarded at the same time, which is arguably the most accurate summary of how Foster has approached her private life throughout her career. It's also worth noting what Foster didn't do afterward. She didn't follow up with interviews unpacking the speech, didn't sit for a tell-all profile, and didn't make her sexuality or her relationships a recurring topic in subsequent press. Whatever the speech meant to say, she considered it said, and moved on with the same guardedness she'd maintained beforehand. Alexandra Hedison, born July 10, 1969, in Los Angeles, is the daughter of actor David Hedison, and had her own run in the entertainment industry well before she and Foster ever met. She worked as an actress through the 1990s and 2000s, appearing in television series including Melrose Place, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, the science fiction series The Others, and a recurring role in Showtime's The L Word, a series centered on a group of friends in Los Angeles that was notable at the time for its focus on lesbian characters and storylines. Acting, though, wasn't where Hedison's creative interests ultimately settled. Over time, she shifted her focus toward fine art photography, a transition she's described as a way of exploring identity and human experience more directly than acting aloud. Site index equals 5-1. She told the New York Times in 2000 for that photography was her work and made her happy/sight, a sentiment that has stayed consistent as her photography career developed. Her work, which often explores light, shadow, and themes of transition, has been exhibited in galleries across the United States and Europe, including a large-format series called Ithaca, shot in the temperate rainforests of North America and featured in the New Yorker's arts coverage. More recently, Hedison's photographs have become part of the Grunwald Center collection at the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and in 2017 she and Foster co-chaired the museum's annual gala together. Before her relationship with Foster, Hedison was in a long-term, publicly known relationship with comedian and talk show host Ellen DeGeneres from around 2000 to 2004. That relationship played out with considerably more media attention than anything Hedison has experienced since, which may help explain why she and Foster have leaned so heavily toward privacy in their own marriage. Hedison's photography career has continued to grow well beyond that earlier chapter of her life. Her exhibitions have included a series titled Rebuilding, which used construction as a visual metaphor for memory and recovery, and a body of work called Everybody Knows This Is Nowhere, shown at a Beverly Hills gallery in 2012. She's had international opportunities as well, including a sponsorship from Barclays Capital and a residency in France, and her photographs have continued to be featured in exhibitions and collections into the 2020s. More recently, she's also moved into documentary filmmaking, working on a short documentary about the non-binary author and performer Alok Vaid-Menon, and she has participated in panel discussions on film and representation, including one focused on Armenian women in entertainment. Across all of it, Hedison has kept a far lower public profile than most people who've dated a celebrity as prominent as DeGeneres or married one as prominent as Foster, treating her own art practice as the primary focus of her public-facing work rather than her personal life. Foster and Hedison married in April 2014, blending their lives together as Hedison joined a family that already included Foster's 2 sons from her earlier relationship with Bernard. In the years since, Hedison has been present at family and industry milestones alongside Foster, without either of them turning the marriage into public content. Foster has occasionally offered small, deliberate glimpses into what her home life looks like. In one interview, she described her relationship with Hedison as mostly built around everyday moments rather than professional collaboration, the two of them talking about jokes, sports, or movies rather than critiquing each other's work. She's also spoken warmly, if briefly, about Hedison teasing her over her collection of acting awards, a small detail that suggests a relationship built more on ease and humor than performance for an audience. Foster has continued to acknowledge Hedison at major career moments. At the 2024 Emmy Awards, after winning for True Detective, Night Country, she thanked her sons by name and closed her speech by thanking Hedison directly as the love of her life. It's one of relatively few moments where Foster has spoken about her marriage in a public setting, and it echoes the same instinct seen throughout their relationship. Acknowledge what matters, then step back out of the spotlight. As for Charles and Kit, now adults, both have largely avoided public attention, consistent with how they were raised. Foster has spoken generally about wanting her children to have as normal an upbringing as possible, despite growing up with a famous parent, an approach that mirrors what Foster herself has said about her own mother's efforts to give her a sense of normalcy during her early acting career. Beyond the fact of their existence, their birth years, and their occasional brief appearances alongside their mother at industry events, the family has kept the boys' lives almost entirely away from public reporting, and there's no reliable public information about their current careers, relationships, or day-to-day lives. That's very much by design. Unlike many children of A-list celebrities, Charles and Kit have no notable social media presence, haven't given interviews, and haven't been the subject of the kind of tabloid coverage that typically follows the children of Oscar winners. Whatever their mother's fame has meant for them personally, it hasn't translated into public visibility of their own, which, given how deliberately Foster has managed her family's boundaries throughout her career, appears to be exactly the outcome she intended. Hedison, for her part, has settled into the role of stepmother without turning it into public material either. She and Foster have been seen at industry functions as a unit for over a decade now, and Foster's own comments about their relationship, brief as they are, suggest a marriage grounded in daily companionship rather than public performance. When Foster does bring up her family in interviews or acceptance speeches, it's typically in passing. A thank you, a dedication, a small aside, never an extended discussion. What makes Foster and Hedison's relationship stand out isn't secrecy for its own sake, it's the consistency of it. Both built demanding, high-profile careers on their own terms, and both seem to have arrived at the same conclusion, that protecting their family's privacy isn't at odds with living full, successful public careers, but is part of what makes that possible. In an industry that often rewards oversharing, Foster and Hedison have built something that looks almost old-fashioned by comparison, a marriage where the public gets a handful of genuine, unforced moments, an award speech, a red carpet appearance, a passing mention in an interview, and little else. Whether that approach comes from necessity, temperament, or simply what works for them, it has clearly lasted. More than a decade in, they remain married, still occasionally seen together at the events that matter most to Foster's career, and otherwise entirely on their own terms. What do you think? Does keeping a relationship this private make it stronger, or is it simply a different way of measuring what a public love story can look like? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe.